Hey everybody, it's Rabbit, and today what we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking at how to unlock the Israeli tech tree in War Thunder. And of course, one of the ways you can do that is by getting Israeli premiums. The second half of this video will focus on reviewing them and telling you which one of the ones I think are actually worth buying. So for starters, you might notice that the Israeli tech tree, unlike every other tech tree in the game, is not actually unlocked from the word go. All the other tech trees, you can simply crew a vehicle and start researching. The big difference here is that Israel doesn't have any low rank vehicles. It doesn't start until rank 4. So in order to unlock Israel, the air tree, what you need is you're going to need a rank 4 or higher American, British, or French plane. And then once you do that, you'll have the option to spend 170,000 silver to unlock the S199, and you can proceed to research the Israeli air tree. Ground forces are very similar. You need a ground vehicle, rank 4 or higher for USA, Britain, France, or the Soviet Union. And once you have that, you will be able to unlock the M51 Sherman for 200,000 silver and start researching the Israeli ground tree. Now, as a bit of a side note, if you believe you have met the requirements but it's still not letting you purchase the S199 or the M51, try closing out of the game and relaunching. That did in fact work for me. Now, one thing to realize is that any Israeli vehicle unlocks the Israeli tech trees, but of course, how do you get an Israeli vehicle without owning the Israeli tech trees? You get a premium, and that's going to be the next phase of this video where we discuss the relative merits or lack thereof of the various Israeli premiums. And our first vehicle today is going to be a real winner. It's Wiseman Spitfire LF Mark 9. Now, if you look at Wiseman Spitfire and you look at the two Spitfires in the Israeli tech tree, you might think, what is the difference? Wiseman Spitfire is effectively the best of both vehicles. It has the excellent air-to-ground ordnance of the regular Spitfire LF Mark 9, but it also has the 150 octane fuel from the Spitfire CW. So this makes it kind of just better than both of them, and it comes with a pretty sick color scheme. It also has two Hispano-Suiza 20mm and two 50 cals, which is a pretty nice combination of air-to-air weapons. In addition, its air-to-ground ordnance is pretty good. Ultimately, it does require a little bit of precision to land, but you have 16 rockets that all fire individually, and you have two 250-pound bombs that drop as a pair. Overall, it's a pretty nice and versatile vehicle, and it's an excellent grinder for air battles. It's also pretty good for supporting ground battles. I really like this vehicle. Considering it's also the cheapest on the list and it's a pack vehicle, and to briefly discuss pack vehicles, a pack vehicle it's not available for Golden Eagles, you have to pay real money. However, it does come with Golden Eagles and it comes with premium time. One of the big advantages of a vehicle that comes with Golden Eagles and premium time versus one that just say only comes with the vehicle itself is that if the pack goes on sale, the amount of Golden Eagles and premium time you get stays the same, so they end up being a very good deal on sale. Overall, Wiseman's Spitfire LF Mark 9 is probably my single biggest recommendation for a vehicle to get you into the Israeli tech tree if you have even the slightest interest in air battles. The only real downside is that a big advantage of premiums is that it researches everything below it efficiently and one rank above it efficiently. Well, there's nothing below the Spitfire LF Mark 9 in terms of rank. It's rank 4, and Israel doesn't even start till rank 4. So you don't really get the full premium benefit off of LF Mark 9 as a researching tool, but it is incredibly good in air and ground battles, and I would highly recommend it. I think it's worth getting even at full price, but I would still look for a sale if you see the opportunity. From one of the best, we go straight to one of the, well, less best, the F84F. Personally, I think the F84F is probably one of the worst vehicles you could get out of the ones we're going to talk about today, and a lot of this really has to do with the fact that it's not that useful in air battles, and as a CAS option, it's strictly worse than things like the A4E Skyhawk in the tech tree. The only real advantage the F84F presents to you, the player, is that it does have an air spawn in air battles, so you can technically try to get some base hits in, but it doesn't even have enough ordnance to destroy a base. Overall, I think the F84F is just never going to be worth it, as it's rank 5, so it can't even research the entire tech tree, and it's quite expensive. I would definitely recommend passing on this one. And next up, we're going to have a personal favorite. This is the A4E Skyhawk. The A4E Skyhawk is a rank 6 ground attacker, and it's not the best in terms of fighting other planes. It's not hyper maneuverable, it's not super fast either, and it does have an awkward rip speed at times. But as a ground attacker, you have the option for gun pods, air-to-air missiles, air-to-ground missiles, even the AGM-62 Walleye, which is a fire and forget guided bomb, which is honestly just a fantastic weapon. It's probably one of my favorite air-to-ground weapons in the game. However, when the A4E first launched, it was a strike aircraft, and all strike aircraft at that point spawned in the air. Shortly after that, Gaijin amended it to where rank 6 or higher strike aircraft no longer spawned in the air. And this really hurt the A4E's ability to grind out the Israeli air tree a lot because it's not a reliable attacker against other aircraft, but with a full bomb load, it doesn't reliably get to bases either. So as much as I think the aircraft is good and functional, the combination of the fact that there's a very similar aircraft in the tech tree, and also that it's not a super efficient air grinder, means this is mostly just a ground RB attacker. If that is all you're looking for, Israel does have a lot of lineups around its BR, and this does stay effective well above its stated battle rating because honestly its weapons are kind of overpowered for its current battle rating. But the lack of usability as an air grinder really does hold it back. So I will say if you see this half off, and because it's a pack vehicle, it could be worth it, especially if you're not super interested in the rest of the air tree. But at full price, I really can't recommend this anymore, even though I do like and use it a lot. Next up, we have the newest vehicle we're going to talk about and the last aircraft for today, the Kfirrkin R. This was added at rank 7. Now, as a fighter, it's reasonably fast. It can pull some good nose authority if it needs to. Two AIM-9Gs are not the best, but they have pretty good range, so you can sneak in some cheeky kills with them. And the 30mm Defas, they definitely take getting used to. The air-to-ground ordnance, you have Zuni rockets and you have various flavors of bombs in addition to a ballistic computer, so it can be competent, even though at 10.7 you probably want some form of guided weapon. Ultimately, it's competent if unspectacular. The problem with the airframe really comes down to it's the most expensive vehicle by far and doesn't have the greatest utility by far. It really doesn't excel at its battle rating and it has a very high price tag attached to it, even though Israel does currently have a ground lineup at 10.7 it can support, and it could grind the entire tech tree if you really wanted to. I really think my assessment with this is when it goes half off, I think this is a fine pickup, but until then, I think it's probably just a little too expensive for how underwhelming it is. Next up, we have the first ground vehicle for today. This is the M51W, and if you're wondering what the real difference is between this and the Tech Tree M51, there's two minor differences. Number one, this one has sharp edges, whereas the Tech Tree one has the M4A1 with the rounded hull edges. Not a huge difference, but it does have slightly better armor, and it also has a 50 cal on the roof instead of a 30 cal, so slightly better against things like, I don't know, low-flying planes, helicopters, or light vehicles. Overall, not a huge difference. Now, the M51s are a bit of an acquired taste, as they're really more of a tank destroyer than anything else, so they do require a specific playstyle, and especially with low crew skills, can be kind of frustrating to play. Additionally, because you also get it as the starter vehicle essentially, it doesn't have the most utility. One advantage of the M51 though is that it does work really well in up tiers because a heat round that penetrates 400mm basically never stops being relevant if you can land your shots. Overall, as much as I've had a lot of success with it, I can't firmly recommend it. I think at half off it's fine, there's nothing wrong with it, but at full price I just don't think it's going to offer enough utility to the average player. That being said, if you have no interest whatsoever in the air tree, this is the cheapest pickup. Next up, we have the Magach 3 ERA, which is a Magach 3 with ERA. Now, the real problem with this vehicle isn't necessarily its performance. In terms of performance, it's very middle of the road in a lot of areas. The armor is okay, the mobility is okay, the gun generally works. It does get up tiered into enemies with stabilizers a fair bit, and it doesn't have one, but if it shoots first, it can generally knock out most opponents pretty easily. The real problem with the Magach 3 ERA is that it's at 7.7, and the Israeli tech tree has 5 vehicles at 7.7 and even a pretty competent vehicle at 7.3, and this isn't even the best out of them. It's essentially going to be a backup for a backup. As we discussed with the F84F as well, it's also rank 5, which makes it both kind of expensive and it doesn't have the best researching potential either. So overall, I can't really recommend this, especially because there's a rank 6 directly above this that has a lot more utility and is basically the same price. So I would say this is not worth it even at half price. Speaking of vehicles that cost basically the same price as the Magach 3 ERA but that are at rank 6, we have the Shotcal Dalet. Now the Shotcal Dalet is very easy to describe because it's basically identical to the Shotcal Gimel in the tech tree. The armor is pretty underwhelming as it's a Centurion with some ERA on it, the mobility is not great. Mostly you will find that enemies will beat you to positions. However, the gun is quite fantastic. At 8.3, you have a Sabo, the M111, that is quite competent. You also have a laser rangefinder, and you also have a full stabilizer, and this is going to be enough to deal with basically anyone you could ever meet should you shoot first. The problem is that this is basically the same as Shot Cal Gimmel in the tech tree, so you're not really adding anything. But it is reasonably competent, and it's not like Israel has a ton of A3 vehicles, unlike 7.7, so you could at least use this, and you can use this above its BR into like the 8.7 lineups as well without any real problems. It's not great, but it's not awful, and I do think that at half price, it's not a bad pickup, even though it wouldn't really be my first pick. And for our last ground vehicle today, we have a real winner, the Merkava Mark II-D. The Merkava series is probably the reason why a lot of people are coming to the Israeli tech tree and to begin with. They are a very unique and very cool looking set of vehicles, and the Mark II-D definitely does not disappoint. Its protection is quite good. It features a lot of extra composite armor on the turret and even some extra armor on the hull versus the tech tree Mark II. Additionally, it has a noticeably better shell than the tech tree Mark II, but it is a slightly higher BR at 9.3. The real selling point of this vehicle isn't just that it's rank 6 and thus can research all the ground vehicles currently, but also that it's very easy to play. You can kind of just drive around and click on enemies and still enjoy some level of success. The only real drawback to the vehicle is it does have somewhat underwhelming mobility, but that doesn't really hold it back. It can just take an absolute beating, and the shell can deal with basically anything you fight, even into max up tiers, although the higher tier enemies you will have to aim a little more carefully. The Mark II-D also spearheads the 9.3 lineup. You have the Galvatosh and the Magok 7C as your backup vehicles for that, and you have the A4N, which is a pretty fantastic ground attacker, and the Mark II-D is really a standout here. I would say even at full price, it's probably worth it, but if you can hold out for one of the half-off sales on pack vehicles, I would still try to go for that if I could. And for our very last vehicle today, we have the only helicopter, or at least the only premium helicopter for Israel, the AH-64A Peten. Now, the AH-64A Peten is easy to describe because it's basically just an AH-64A. The only real difference between this and the tech tree one is that it's a premium. I'm not actually sure if there is a difference. One of the big advantages to any premium helicopter is you don't have to go through the fairly tedious helicopter tech tree, especially if it's high enough tier, and there really isn't any helicopter dramatically better than a Peten right now for Israel. The AH-64D is good, but it's not really that much of an improvement. So you could just skip the entire tech tree and get a helicopter. You might ask, what is the advantage to a helicopter? Well, helicopters are cheaper to spawn than aircraft. They're also cheaper to repair than aircraft. They're also kind of easier to fly. And because they can use terrain more effectively, they're easier to use in contested airspace with enemy anti-air. So they're easier to get more value out of, especially when the higher you go and the more effective anti-air get. Overall, I think the Apache, it's not the best helicopter right now, but the Hellfires still work, the Stingers kind of still work, the gun is actually really good at shredding other planes that try to come at you. I think the Peten is effective, but helicopters are such a niche aircraft that it's hard for me to definitively say if it is or isn't worth it, and it's really just going to come down to whether or not you want to learn how to fly one. Ultimately, I do think it's good, but it's also really expensive, so I will let you be the judge on that. I will say at half price, I think it's fine, otherwise it's a lot more questionable. And that will wrap us up for the day. Hope you enjoyed it, hope you found it educational, and I hope you enjoy your time with the Israeli tech tree. And of course, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe. That really helps my channel out. Have a nice day, everybody.